Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Goodnight Stories with Monica from the North Richland Hills Library. I'm here with my friend George, and we are in the middle of Chapter 8 of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Alice has just started talking to the Cheshire Cat when the king walks up and asks, "Who are you talking to?" said the king, and looking at the cat's head with great curiosity. "Well, it's a friend of mine, a Cheshire Cat," said Alice. "Allow me to introduce it." "I don't like the look of it at all," said the king. "However, it may kiss my hand if it likes." "I'd rather not," said the cat. "Don't be impertinent," said the king, "and don't look at me like that." He got behind Alice as he spoke. "A cat may look at a king," said Alice. "I've read that in a book somewhere, but I don't quite remember." "Well, it must be removed," said the king, very decidedly, and he called on the queen, who was passing by at the moment. "My dear, I wish you would have this cat removed." The queen had only one way of settling all difficulties, great or small. "Off with his head," she said without even looking around. "I'll fetch the executioner myself," said the king, and he hurried off. Alice thought she might as well go back and see how the game was going on, as she heard the queen's voice in the distance, screaming with passion. She had already heard her sentence 3 of her players to be executed for having missing their turns, and she did not like the look of things, as the game was in such confusion that she never knew whether it was her turn or not. So she went off in search of her hedgehog. The hedgehog was engaged in a fight with another hedgehog, which seemed to Alice an excellent opportunity for croqueting one of them with the other. The only difficulty was that her flamingo was gone across to the other side of the garden, where Alice could see it trying to helpless sort of way to fly up in a tree. By the time she had caught the flamingo and brought it back, the fight was over, and both the hedgehogs were out of sight. "Well, it doesn't matter much," thought Alice, "as all the arches are gone from this side of the ground." So she tucked the flamingo under her arm that it might not escape again, and went back to have a little more conversation with her friend, the Cheshire Cat. When she got back to the Cheshire Cat, she was quite surprised to find a large crowd gathered around it. There was a dispute going on between the executioner, the king, and the queen, who were all talking at once, while all the rest were quite silent and looking very uncomfortable. The moment Alice appeared, she was appealed to by all three to settle the question. As they repeated their arguments to her, though, as they spoke all at once, she found it very hard to make out exactly what they said. The executioner's argument was that you couldn't cut off a head unless there was a body to cut it off from, and he had never had to do such a thing before, and he wasn't going to begin at this time. The king's argument was that anything that had a head could be beheaded, and that you weren't to talk nonsense. And then the queen's argument was that if something wasn't done about it in less than no time, she'd had everybody executed all around. It was this last remark of the queen's that had made the whole party look so grave and anxious. Alice could think of nothing else to say, but "The cat belongs to the Duchess. You'd better ask her about it." "She's in prison," said the queen. "Fetch her there," and the executioner went off like an arrow. The cat's head began fading away the moment he was gone, and by the time he had come back with the Duchess, it entirely had disappeared. So the king and the executioner ran wildly up and down looking for it, while the rest of the party went back to the game. Chapter 9. The Mock Turtle's Story. "You can't think how glad I am to see you again, you dear old thing," said the Duchess, as she tucked her arm affectionately into Alice's, and they walked off together. Alice was very glad to find her in such pleasant temper, and thought to herself that perhaps it was only the pepper that had made her so savage when they had first met in the kitchen. "When I'm Duchess," thought Alice to herself, "I won't have any pepper in any kitchen at all. Soup does very well without it. So maybe it's always pepper that makes people hot-tempered." And she went on, very much pleased at having found out a new kind of rule. and vinegar makes them sour. Chamomile makes them bitter, and barley sugar and such things that make children sweet-tempered. I only wish people knew that. Then they wouldn't be so stingy about it, you know." She had quite forgotten the Duchess by this time and was a little startled when she heard her voice so close to her ear. "You're thinking about something, my dear, and that makes you forget to talk. I can't tell you just now what the moral of that is, but I remember it a bit." "Perhaps it doesn't have a moral," Alice ventured to remark. "Child, everything's got a moral, if you can only find it," said the Duchess, and she squeezed herself up closer to Alice's as she spoke. Alice did not like much keeping so close to her, first, because the Duchess was very ugly, and secondly, because she was exactly the right height to rest her chin on Alice's shoulder, and it was an uncomfortably sharp chin. However, she did not like to be rude, so she bore it as well as she could. "The game's going on rather better now," she said, by way of keeping up the conversation a little. "'Tis so," said the Duchess, "and the moral of that is, oh, 'tis love, that makes the world go round." "Somebody said," Alice whispered, "that it's done by everybody minding their own business." "Oh, well, it means a little the same thing," said the Duchess, digging her sharp little chin into Alice's shoulder as she added, "and the moral of that is, take care of the sense, and the sounds will take care of themselves." "How fond she is of finding morals in everything," Alice thought to herself. "I dare say you're wondering why I don't put an arm around your waist," said the Duchess. "The reason is that I'm doubtful about the temper of your flamingo. Shall I try the experiment?" "He might bite," Alice cautiously replied, not feeling at all anxious to have the experiment tried. "Very true," said the Duchess. "Flamingos and mustard both bite, and the moral of that is, birds of a feather flock together." "Only mustard isn't a bird," Alice remarked. "Right as usual," said the Duchess. "What a clear way you have putting things." "It's a mineral, I think," said Alice. "Of course it is," said the Duchess, who seemed ready to agree to everything that Alice said. "There's a large mustard mine near here, and the moral of that is, the more there is of mine, the less there is of yours." "Oh, I know!" exclaimed Alice, who had not attended to this last remark. "It is a vegetable. It doesn't look like one, but it is." "I quite agree with you," said the Duchess, "and the moral of that is, be what you would seem to be, or, if you'd like it put another way simply, never imagine yourself not to be otherwise than what it might appear to others that what you were or might have been was not otherwise than what you would have appeared to them to be otherwise." "I think I should understand that better," Alice said very politely, "if I had written it down, but I can't quite follow it as you say it." "That's nothing to what I could say if I were close," that Duchess replied in a pleased tone. "Pray don't trouble yourself to say it any longer than that," said Alice. "Oh, don't talk about trouble," said the Duchess. "I make you a present of everything I've said as yet." "A cheap sort of present," thought Alice. "I'm glad they don't give birthday presents like that," but she did not venture to say that out loud. "Thinking again?" asked the Duchess, with another dig of her sharp little chin. "I've a right to think," said Alice, for she was beginning to feel a bit worried. "Just about as much a right," said the Duchess, "as pigs have to fly. And the moral—" But here, to Alice's great surprise, the Duchess's voice died away, even in the middle of her favorite word, moral, and the arm that was linked to hers began to tremble. Alice looked up, and there stood the Queen in front of them, with her arms folded, frowning like a thunderstorm. "A fine day, Your Majesty," the Duchess began. "Now I give you fair warning," shouted the Queen, stamping on the ground as she spoke. Either you or your head must be off, and that in half no time. Take your choice." The Duchess took her choice and was gone in a moment. "Let's go on with the game," said the Queen, and Alice was much too frightened to say a word, but she followed her back to the croquet ground. And we will stop there and pick up again the next time we're all together for Good Night Stories. Have a nice evening. Good night.